Peter, how are you?
I'm good, Peter. How are you?
Good. So a mutual friend of ours recommended that I should talk to you, Daniel Prince.
There we go. He's a good man.
He's a good man. He was here the other day. He came to watch my football team, and we had a Sunday roast here in the village.
Oh, yeah. He was here for the UK for the Wales Bitcoin Conf, wasn't he?
I don't know about that. I think he was just here for Real Bedford football.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was
I don't know.
The main draw. Why most people come to the UK.
Well, he said you've got to talk to Peter. He said you've got to get him on your podcast. If you do a sprint here in the UK, you've got to speak to him. So I don't always do this, but not everyone will know who you are. So for this one, we need to tee it up. Just tell people who you are, your background, and why we're here today, what we're going to talk about. Well, they'll know that from the title.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Peter Young, and I'm the managing director of the Free Cities Foundation. Free Cities Foundation is an organization that works with smaller territories around the world that want to adopt innovative policies that are aligned to market principles. I've been doing this for about a year, but before that, I spent most of my career based in China doing UK trade and investment work. And I discovered Bitcoin through the Chinese community in about 2017. I started getting introduced to the ideas in Austrian economics and libertarian ideas around that time. And that was part of the reason why I eventually made a decision to move into the free cities and kind of market economic space.
You didn't think of establishing a free city in China?
Well, that's an interesting one. There's already quite a few special economic zones in China. So there's already a precedent there and some interesting case studies. But China's a difficult place to establish like truly autonomous areas for a number of historical reasons.
Yes. Okay. So this is a subject I'm interested in. I know a bit about it. My friend Balaji has just written an interesting book covering similar ideas. And we used to have this other podcast called Defiance, and we made a show about free cities for that.
Right.
And so I'm interested in it, but at the same time, I'm skeptical and have a lot of kind of challenges and questions, which I think we'll work through today. But for you, I kind of want to understand what the steps were. Was it you discovered Bitcoin and libertarian ideas and you felt like this is an area you want to work in, or was there just like a coincidence or a meeting of ideas? What kind of happened?
So when I was in China, I worked for the UK government, for the UK embassy in Beijing and the consulate in Wuhan. So I was kind of working in Wuhan before it got big, Peter. Yeah.
You were in Wuhan before it was cool.
I was in Wuhan before it was cool, from 2015 to 2016.
Did you go down to the local market and buy any
I may have done.
bat soup?
Yeah, it's good bat soup down there. I mean, I may have done that.
Pangolin?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I didn't know that. All right, anyway, carry on, sorry.
Well, yeah, living in China, I was kind of working on the inside of like a major government, obviously the UK government. And I came through that to be exposed to a lot of ideas related to how spending decisions were made and how governments go about deciding what they're going to regulate, what they're going to try and influence overseas. And I was fairly skeptical of some of the principles that were laid out, but didn't have enough of an understanding to really challenge them. So it was around 2017 that I fell in with a good Bitcoiner crowd in China who were really into Austrian economics and really into Bitcoin as well. And so in tandem, I started to learn about both of these things. And I found that they were a much better explanation for what was happening in China, what was happening in the UK, what was happening around the world in economic terms than what I'd been presented with previously. So I had about 3 years where I went quite deep into some of the classics of the Austrian school, works by Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, Karl Menger. And through that process, I started to look at how different kinds of political system could be established that would be more aligned to libertarian principles. And that's how I came to the Free Cities Foundation.
And was the foundation already established, or did you establish it?
No, so the foundation was established in 2017 in a different form. So our founder is called Titus Gabel. He's written a book called Free Private Cities, Making Governments Compete for You.
I have a feeling, did we not talk to him?
I don't think so.
I think you heard a show with Titus now.
No, I think we might have spoken to him when we looked at making that show for Defiance. Was he nomadic for a period? Is he blonde?
No.
Oh, I might be confusing with somebody else. I just think the name stands out.
Okay. Well,
can you find his Twitter?
Mm-hmm. He's not active on Twitter, but you'll find stuff about him on YouTube. He's done lots of talks.
Okay, anyway.
So he's the guy that's founded this foundation, and I've been managing director for about a year. And we've recently done a rebrand. We changed the name because it was previously the Free Private Cities Foundation. It's now the Free Cities Foundation. We just have a slightly broader remit now. But yeah, Titus was the guy that founded it. I got introduced to it through Titus and Rahim Tahazadagan, who's an Austrian school economist based in Vienna. So he previously worked for the foundation, and I ended up finding them through work I was doing with some other Viennese people. So
I'm sure Balaji introduced me to him. It really stands out. I'm gonna have to check after this.
Yeah.
Okay, so how big is the foundation? How many people work at the foundation?
We've got about 10 people as the core team, and then we've got a few contractors, and we've got 4 on our board.
And is the idea to establish free cities or to support people who want to? How does it work?
So the foundation itself, we make the moral case that a world where there's a plethora of different kinds of society, where people consent to the rules and people have the ability to choose what kind of system they live under, is a better society for everyone.
Okay.
That's what we make the case for. And we run a conference, we put out social media posts that spread the message about this, we create resources for people that want to learn more. And then we also work closely with commercial partners. There's a commercial partner called Tipolis, which invests actively in projects like the Zones for Employment and Economic Development in Honduras. There's a couple of active projects there. We've got a new project in the pipeline in West Africa that we're hoping to be able to announce at our conference in October. So there is an element of working with investors that are actually actively building Free Cities Aligned projects. But then we also just create general resources for people that want to take this forward themselves to go and do so.
There's a free city in India as well, isn't there? That's one I'm aware of.
There's various areas of India that have a high degree of autonomy, but
there's a particular free city. Danny, can you try and look it up? I'll know if you find it. There's a particular one because when I was there. That's it.
What was the name?
Auroville.
Okay.
Do you know of Auroville?
It rings a bell, but we don't have any relationships over there with Auroville or with many with India. To be honest, it's an area we like to work.
Yeah, because when I was in India, I met somebody who was like they were heading there and they were explaining it to it. That was like one of my first exposures to these cities. And I was reading about it all on like Wikipedia, and anyone can go along and visit it and stay there apparently.
Right.
Can you find it?
Yeah. Let me pull it up.
Yeah, they had a bunch of weird different rules around it, but it's like a village community that all works together. I don't know what they do for money, but here we go. Auroville belongs to nobody in particular, belongs to humanity as a whole. But to live in Auroville, you must be a willing servitor of the divine consciousness. Oh God, Auroville will be the place of unending education and constant progress, and a youth that never ages. Okay, it sounds pretty hippie.
Yeah.
That sounds like a commune.
Do we have an idea of the size of it? Okay, 2,800 people.
That's small. Yeah, that's a community.
So we work with various kinds of projects, ranging from fully autonomous zones within nation states to intentional communities. And there are tens of thousands of intentional communities across the world.
Okay.
And this would be like definitely on the larger side of the intentional communities end, but there are lots of different rationales for people coming together to establish a common set of rules, and they have lots of different political philosophies. We tend to work more with those that have a more libertarian focus, but there are quite a few projects out there that you could name that want to be established with their own unique set of rules.
Okay, give me an example of one of the projects you're working on at the moment, and then that's probably would it be easier for me to then start pinging the questions that you have.
Yeah, so our founder, Titus, and the commercial organization Tipolis have an active investment in a project in Honduras called Próspera. This project has got about 150 acres of land.
Is it on an island?
It's on the island of Roatan, which is off to the north of
We know of this,
Honduras.
don't we?
Yeah. And what they're doing is exercising a degree of autonomy that they've been granted by the Honduran government to do interesting things with property rights. So, for example, establishing 3D property rights rather than 2D property rights.
What does that mean?
That means that if you have a house, you can decide that you're going to buy some of the land in the air, some of the space in the air above someone else's house. And what that means is that with problems like, so if you're in a densely populated area and someone comes and builds a very large skyscraper next to your house and blocks out all the light, then this is this is going to reduce your standard of living because you don't have access to natural light. So the way they try and get around that is by establishing 3D property rights in the air. So this is just one example of like an innovative governance thing that they're introducing, but they're also introducing, people using Bitcoin within the companies over there. They have like looser kind of regulations around the business activity there. So it's quite a free business environment. They have lots of very innovative ways in which they're doing the building. So they're creating modular buildings in the area, which in normal planning permission circumstances wouldn't be possible because you have to kind of create a finished product. And so they're experimenting with lots of different governance innovations when it comes to land regulation, business regulation, currency, and then property rights regulation.
Okay, so how much autonomy are they given by Honduras? Do they have a local owned government?
So it's probably the highest degree of autonomy that any area within a nation state has been granted. So they get autonomy to over some of their commercial law, but not the criminal law.
Yeah.
And there is an entity like a private operating company that manages all of the services that are deemed to be that would normally be provided by a local government. So there's a high degree of autonomy there. They can set their own, they can decide that their legal system is going to be arbitrated by a third-party court, so a court that's in another country if they want to. They can have their own court independently that's set up.
For civil crime or for civil litigation or for even criminal?
For civil litigation. So criminal is still done through Honduras, but this is to do with mainly business regulations for companies that come and set up there. Mm-hmm. They can decide that they're going to, for example, if there are two Swiss companies that come and set up in this area, they can decide that they're going to sign a contract and have a Swiss judge arbitrate any disputes between them.
Okay.
So this kind of thing is, there's a high degree of autonomy that's been granted to these areas within Honduras. Próspera is one. There is another one.
Sorry, let's just stick with that one. So, sorry, because it's interesting. So who provides the policing?
So that's provided by the operating company.
Okay.
They hire a private company, like a private security force, then they police the area.
And then do they provide it for the whole of the area and people pay a tax, or is it an opt-in?
So you pay a fee to be part of the community.
Okay.
And it's the same in Morazan, which is another area. So you pay a fee to be part of the community. It's quite a low fee. And then there are additional fees that are paid by the companies. So
it's like a council tax, basically. You pay a fee and you get your services.
Yeah, so similar to a council tax. It's written within a contract what it's going to be. So when you sign up, you know what the fee is going to be for a period of time afterwards. And then there are also some other sources of revenue that are drawn from the companies. So there's also an income tax for the companies, for example.
This is it.
That's it. Yeah,
it's beautiful. We should.
It's a beautiful place. You should go.
You've been?
Yes, I have. Went in last.
Is this real or is this like an artist interpretation?
This is Pristine Bay, I believe. I can't quite see with the light. This is the main area where they have the offices in Próspera.
Just for people listening, we're looking at photos of this. This is on bitcoinmagazine.com, so we'll put it in the show notes. It's a beautiful island.
Yeah, this might be part of the Pristine Bay development.
Is that a golf tee?
Yeah, they've recently purchased a golf course to incorporate into the area.
Okay, so you pay a fee. Do you know what the fee is?
So if you want to become an e-resident of Próspera, I believe it's about $500 a year. Someone that's like a remote resident.
Okay.
And it's about $500 a year. That doesn't, you don't necessarily need to be based within the zone. You can have access to the services, you can have access to the legal arbitration, but they have about 300, I think, people that are currently e-residents.
So I could just e-register and come and stay.
Yes.
And what is it like? Is there a hotel I can book there if I want to go and visit?
There are. So not actually within Próspera itself. So Próspera itself is currently reasonably small. We're talking like a few dozen people living and working within the area. As the same for the other projects that are over there.
But what could it grow to?
Tens of thousands of people
in Próspera.
Well, the thing to bear in mind about it is that it's not, Próspera itself is not just a specific piece of land. It's kind of a platform through which any area of land can join and grow. So it was initially a 58-acre development, and then they incorporated this Pristine Bay development, which was about another 70 to 80 acres.
All on the island.
And these are on the island, but Próspera as an entity is managing these individual areas through a common set of rules that they have. And you don't have to have contiguous land. The land can be based in any part of Honduras or even any other country.
As long as, okay, they'll come back to that. So as long as the government approves it?
So what Próspera have done is they've created a governance platform. And if any area of any country decides they agree that part of the land can be part of Próspera, that can happen. That's their long-term ambition. So what they've already done is increase the size to this 150-acre slot. But they could also do that if there were other areas of land that could be incorporated. They could also expand to incorporate that.
But so if, say I owned a bunch of land in Honduras and I wanted to become part of it, what is the incentive for me to do that? What do I get from being part of Próspera that I don't? What do I get new?
So you get a different kind of regulatory environment.
Okay.
So one of the challenges that Honduras faces is that a lot of businesses that would otherwise invest there won't invest there because they're not confident in the legal system or they're not confident in the security situation. Honduras has got one of the highest crime rates in the world. So if you have a situation where maybe there are issues with the local police and you're not happy with that, or there are issues with the courts and you have a business dispute and you're not happy with it going to a normal court, then this offers the ability to have disputes arbitrated by a different set of rules and different system.
Okay, so this makes sense. So you can bypass the less reliable, potentially, I don't want to make false accusations, but potentially corrupt security forces and legal system and have a more private system or more independent system that people can trust in.
That's correct, yes.
And the Honduras government likes this because you're essentially privatizing parts of the legal and security system because they can't handle it.
So the current Honduran government doesn't really like this.
Okay.
The previous Honduran government did like this, and this law was established in 2013. So these zones have been in existence for about 3 or 4 years. They're a few years after the law was introduced, but earlier this year, a new government led by Xiomara Castro came into office, and they have a very different political agenda from the previous one. And so at the moment, there is currently some uncertainty around what's going to happen with the future of the zones because the current government is quite anti them.
So that kind of leads on to my next question, because I was like, this sounds great. What if the government just says, well, fuck this, we want all this land back and screw you and your laws?
That's a great question. So that's why one of the things that we focus on at the foundation is to try and give new zones a really strong legal footing, because we believe in strong property rights for people. We believe that that's the best way to encourage growth and to alleviate poverty. And if you have a system legally whereby someone can't just come in and totally overturn an existing system. Like, for example, in the UK, a new government they can't overturn UK common law. Common law is established over centuries through decisions made by judges. There are certain things that we say, like, there are limits to the power that we have to our elected governments. And I think you can make a case for that in other areas as well. And one of the things that can be done with special zones is that you can have, for example, international treaties that are signed that protect the zones, such that if the government of a country decides they're going to expropriate property or land or resources from a particular zone, then overseas governments have a right to do the same to Honduran assets or to that government's assets in another area. You can also do things like introduce constitutional protections. So both of these have been done in Honduras. So there was a constitutional amendment made, there were international treaties, and these mean that actually for the existing projects, even though the current government has said we're not a fan of these projects, it's quite hard for them to actually change the status quo because there's very strong legal protections that were put in place.
But certain presidents sometimes ignore constitutions.
They do.
We saw that with in Bolivia. Was it Morales? Morales was he? And some people would argue in El Salvador that Bukele is ignoring the constitution, will likely run again. We don't have to debate why or not. But so there's two ways to defend property rights: through the judicial system
Yep.
and through armed defense. Does Próspera need an army?
Well, so just to go to the way that you can defend it without having to resort to an army, if you have a international treaty which says that if you expropriate resources in this area that our people from our country have invested in, so Próspera has one with, well, the Honduran government has an investment protection treaty with Kuwait. So because Kuwaiti nationals have invested in Próspera, if there is deemed to be expropriation of their resources in Próspera, then the Kuwaiti government has the right to seize Honduran assets in Kuwait. So this is a way that you can protect investment in areas without having to resort to like direct military defense of the area.
That's fair.
That's something that's already been introduced.
Okay. I mean, I just like the thought of, I think governments will always struggle to be able to deliver everything that a government feels like it should because they're incompetent and inefficient. And having traveled around South America, we know there's challenges with regards to security and trust in the local law enforcement, the judicial system, and business. To be able to outsource that to more trustworthy private entities is a logical next step because it takes the responsibility off the government, it takes the cost burden, and it puts trust in the businesses that want to invest in that. It makes absolute total sense. Like I get it more now, having heard that, than I did say previously. So, with regards to this situation in Honduras, unfortunately, the local government, the new government, let's say, they're not as interested. Do you have a program to try and educate them and spend time with them?
So,
ideally,
no, we don't. And I think there are people that are involved in the projects, running the projects directly, that do have those dialogues with the Honduran government. We don't seek that out ourselves, partly because they're very far away from our thinking on a number of different issues. It's a communist party, so their ideals are very different. Yes,
I didn't know this.
Yeah, it's,
right.
It's
well, hold on. Are they? I mean, are they a historical communist party? Or
they ran on a certainly a very socialist platform.
Okay.
And I think the words communism we use, I mean, I'd have to look the exact vocabulary that was used.
I mean, are they not aware of the history of failed socialism in South America?
Well, this is one question we ask. Yes, it does seem it's a little bit exasperating that people are still voting for these kinds of ideas, given the history in the region of them not.
How long have they
succeeding.
Been in? Sorry, I know we're
only about 6 months.
And how much damage have they done so far?
Well, there's been quite a bit of drama at the parliament. There's been a reasonable amount of policy change that they've been able to introduce. People can go and look that up if they want to see exactly what happened. There's been some kind of like lots of political struggles at the beginning, but yeah, I mean they're just trying to take the country in a direction which we don't personally think is going to be helpful for people.
I wasn't aware of any of this.
Yeah,
so.
well.
Wow. Okay. So really, I understand why they don't like your ideas. Then, if they're a socialist/communist based party, because you're essentially advocating for the opposite, which is a private system. Okay, so within your system, there is a fee you pay if you're an e-resident, so that's a visiting resident. What about a permanent resident?
So you can't actually establish a permanent residency like with a passport, in the sense that you can bypass the visa system of Honduras. That's one power that hasn't been granted to these zones. But the way that it works, to expand it a bit more beyond this one project, Próspera. So the way that they do membership of the cities in another project, Morazán, which is by San Pedro Sula, which is the largest city in Honduras, that's done based on, you can either become a member of the city or you can like rent a property there. And so there are lots of people there that are renting properties that are like very affordable, and they provide basic security for the people that are resident there through the private operating system, through the security system that they have there.
What's it called?
The area. Yeah. So it's San Pedro Sula, and then if you go up from San Pedro Sula to Choloma, which is an area with very high crime rates, then Morazan sits within that.
Is it like a compound?
It's like a walled area. You could call it a compound. It's a walled area with houses, with some industrial.
Can we find
projects.
pictures of it?
What's that called? Sorry,
Morazan. If you go to our website, you'll be able. You might be able to find some pictures. free-cities.org.
Just to clear it up as well, they were a liberal party rather than. I don't know what their policies are, but they're not actually called a communist party. They're a liberal party.
Click on blog, and then scroll down. Click on the Rosa Aguilar one. So this is one of the residents of Morazan.
One mother fighting for her dreams.
Yeah. You scroll down a bit, you'll see a few more pictures. So that's Rosa who moved there, and this is constructing.
What are they constructing there?
This is constructing the main warehouse where they now have a medical supplies company.
Okay. Is that a private company that's come in and established there
It is.
because they trust it?
Yes.
And they are able to distribute supplies throughout Honduras?
Throughout Latin America.
Latin America, but they feel safe having a property there because they have legal protection and security, and people won't come in and raid and.
That's one of the incentives. Yeah.
Okay. And then these are the homes that have been established?
Yeah, these are some of the homes. This is a new set of construction there. The woman who's living in this area that this article is about is staying in this house at the end.
And
of the road.
she's Honduran.
She is.
And this for her is good because she is able to live somewhere slightly safer. It's better for her and her daughter. Is that what we're saying? And okay. So this is a way of privately solving historic poverty and crime issues within developing countries.
Yeah. So the woman that was staying, that is now living in Morazan, was staying in an area called Choloma, just nearby. She'd never had a business before. She'd was in quite a few personal problems with her family, has some young children. She's a single mother. And this provided her an opportunity to become an entrepreneur for the first time, to have a place that she could know that she would be able to use for a stable period of time, where there was stable electricity, but also where she knew that there wasn't going to be any kind of local issues with crime. And she's been very successful. She's now employing her own staff. She's got her own basic stuff for a restaurant, for a small shop.
And do her staff live in the same private area as her, or do they recruited in?
I think they commute in. I'm not sure actually if they live there or not.
And how did she afford to do this? Did she have money, or did she go and get a loan within there?
It's quite cheap to do it.
Yeah.
So I think they charged her something like $20 a month to live there, to rent an apartment.
How can that work?
Partly because because it's good to have her as part of the community, because she provides services to the workers. And so they want to just offer her a really good rate.
Okay.
But on the understanding that it was still like a paid service and that there would be conditions attached to staying. But they just try and establish the basic principles, but make it as affordable as possible for local people, because they think it's a good thing to have them as part of the community alongside these larger businesses like the medical supplies company.
Okay, so that's Honduras. Where else are you establishing or working with private cities?
Yeah, so outside of Honduras, what we've been able to do is more limited. I mean, we've got some partnerships with some intentional communities. So one that I'd name is called Liberstad in Norway, which is an intentional community that's being set up there. It doesn't have any kind of legal independence, but it's a place where people are coming together with a kind of libertarian mindset in order to establish a community. And that's a small project with a few dozen people again, but that's an example of one nearer to Europe.
What can an intentional community do without having any control over setting laws? Because the majority of the framework for libertarian ideas comes from the idea with regards to the size of the state and legal framework. So if you're not able to affect or have your own set of laws, what can you actually do?
So there's a bit you can do. You can trade internally in a way that's not utilizing the banking system, and there are different rules around trade, around taxation, around what needs to be reported in terms of accounting and things like that.
Why though? Because if you're evading local tax laws, then you're
not evading them. So there's different rules in lots of places, but also in Norway regarding what you can do if you're just trading internally as a community. So this particular, if you're not using fiat currency when you're trading, you're just using some other tokens. This particular project has a stable coin that they use in order to conduct local trade.
And then Fedimint.
Yeah.
Do you know about Fedimint?
A little bit, yeah. I was talking to Obi yesterday actually, and it came up in the discussion I had.
That sounds perfect for them.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a way that you can. Yeah, this is the project. It's a way that you can. If you're someone that doesn't like to have to do a lot of reporting for all your activities to the government, then you can join a community like this, and you can do it through their individual stablecoin. And then the way that it works internally is that only the company itself does like the reporting and buying of things on behalf of the community,
right?
And then that sort of streamlines and simplifies the whole process.
What you guys really want, though, you really want a large, successful private city. 10,000, 100,000, even 1 million people. That must be the goal, to prove this works at scale. I think even somebody like myself who's interested or skeptical wants to see it work.
Sure.
And wants to see how it works. And wants to see that option. I love that thing where Balaji talks about vote with your feet rather than with your ballot. It's much more effective. What are the biggest hurdles to get into that point? Is it that the state just has such a stranglehold and something like this is such a threat to them and nobody ever wants to allow this?
Well, it's convincing people that this is a good thing to do, and in part it's finding the right areas where you can buy land and you can expand, and it takes time. I've mentioned projects in Honduras, and I mentioned other projects like Liberstad we have partnerships with. But we're also working on a new project in West Africa, which hopefully we'll be able to announce in 2 to 3 months. And this is somewhere where we are aiming for that like 10,000 kind of figure eventually.
So how much can you tell us about that without announcing it?
Not a great deal, other than if all goes to plan, then that will allow an even higher degree of autonomy than what's been possible in Honduras.
Right.
So if people want to learn about that, we'll be making some announcements about it at Liberty in Our Lifetime in October.
It's not the one with that rapper, is it?
Sorry?
It's not the one with that rapper.
Akon.
Yeah.
It's not, no.
Thank God.
It's not
Jesus Christ.
Why would any of these countries allow you to do this? Do they get paid from the city?
So we ideally try and create a win-win situation for the government. So the government in Honduras, there is a percentage, there's like a profit sharing deal for the company that comes and sets the development up. So a percentage of the profits, something like 12% from the Honduran projects goes to the government. But also the same reason that countries allow the establishment of special economic zones, because it brings in investment, it creates a preferable environment that's more competitive internationally. So people come in, they invest, they build things, that creates jobs for people who are in the surrounding areas. So there's lots of reasons why people establish special zones, and these zones just go slightly further in terms of their autonomy. And that's the case we always try and make this is a genuinely beneficial thing for the government, because we believe that it is a symbiotic kind of relationship, that if you establish a special zone, then it does genuinely help the host government, because if you look at, we're talking about China at the beginning of the show. If you look at what's happened to the area surrounding Hong Kong, like Shenzhen is now the wealthiest per capita place in China in part because of its relationship with Hong Kong and the fact that it sits just across the border. Because when you have these really wealthy and successful areas, then that creates more opportunities for people in the geographical proximity. So we make that kind of case to governments when we're talking to them about establishing special zones.
And I guess you're taking some of their responsibility away from managing areas and paying them for it. You're paying them to operate an area for all of them. It's there's like a strong logic to it, but at the same time, you're making an argument for government to not exist. You're basically having to tell them there's no reason for you to exist without telling them that, but telling them enough to convince them to do it.
Well,
yeah.
If you want to get into a really philosophical case for it, some people you could make that argument. What we're saying really is that you don't have to go as far as we might do individually in terms of your view on politics and whether you think that you want to go to a full anarcho-capitalist kind of society, or whether you think something like that's more libertarian but further further away from that and more close to what today's society might be is the better option. You don't really have to take a position on that, because in practical terms, what we're suggesting is that the zones are just granted a high degree of autonomy, and we make the case for having good legal frameworks, for having better incentives for the zones that are established, such that the people that are running the zones have a direct incentive to make them succeed. They're not rewarded for decisions that boost activity in the short term but might be bad for the long term. So we make the case to governments that this is a good thing, and we point to examples of city-states like Monaco, Singapore, Hong Kong, Liechtenstein, and the kind of wealth belts that have been generated around them.
Are those particular territories successful, though, because they're able to establish themselves as zero tax or low tax regions in areas where people want to avoid tax, and therefore it brings in the wealthy into those regions and they become successful because of that?
I don't think that's really the right way to look at it.
But I think it's an important lens to look. So if Monaco, zero tax.
Well, zero income tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also,
so it's great for Formula One drivers.
Yeah, Monaco has most of its tax is raised through VAT, and it has a system whereby it strangely, like, people think about it as like an offshore financial place, but there's really not much of a finance industry there. I
think it's a holiday zone, and it's good for wealthy people. I'm not criticizing. I'm trying, Liechtenstein, what's the tax rate there?
I'm not entirely sure the tax rate, but the examples I'm more familiar with would be like Hong Kong, Singapore.
Yeah.
And if you look at those examples, I mean, people turned up in their millions to Hong Kong during the Cultural Revolution with nothing. There was people fleeing the Vietnam War that were able to find refuge in Hong Kong. But the history of this region is that loads of people turned up, started from absolutely nothing, arrived with just the clothes that they had and a suitcase, and it's turned into a place that is wealthier in per capita terms than the UK is. And it took about 4 to 5 decades for that to happen.
Why is that as well?
Why is that?
Yeah, why do you think, why was Hong Kong so successful?
I think it was because in the post-war years, they established a very minimal government regime where there was between 9 and 12% government expenditure as a proportion of overall GDP. And that compared to, say, 40+% in the UK. So the government in Hong Kong was much, much leaner than the UK government, because it had some government officials. There was one who was the chief financial officer called Sir John Cobblethwaite, who had some more libertarian ideas. And through that, he kept the government really lean and small, and just established clear property rights, which is what we advocate for at the Free Cities Foundation. And through that happening, the Hong Kong's economy really succeeded in a short period of time. And I think the most impactful story for me is just the huge amount of people that I know were able to escape from what happened in mainland China and dramatically improve their lives as a result of it. So
until recently, sadly.
Until recently, but even now, it's still. I think the changes that have happened in Hong Kong relate to politics and media. And even now, you can still do business there with a relative degree of freedom. I am definitely concerned with what's happened in Hong Kong, but I think there's a lot to be learned from the overall story of how it succeeded in terms of how they kept the government lean and how they kept private property rights strong.
It reminds me a little bit of that tweet we saw yesterday as well from the guy who was the president of Estonia in terms of fixing their country. Yes. And as see if you can dig that out, because I just think that's an interesting analogy. But I guess what you're saying is the more limited government is, the more opportunity there is for people to flourish. I'm not somebody who's ever been convinced by the idea of no government. But I think there needs to be some kind of government, but hopefully limited, as small as possible. My worry about no government and purely private is what's now happening in Singapore, which has essentially gone very authoritarian, which is always the risk of having a fully private kind of jurisdictional area. What's your kind of like interpretation of what's happened there?
So the difference between, say, Singapore and what we would advocate, like, so there are various models. The core model that we advocate is the free private cities model, which is a conception of Titus Gable. And within this model, the way that the relationship between citizens and the people that operate cities, we call them city operators, works, is that there is a real contract that is signed between each citizen and each operator. And within this contract, you specify all of the rules that the city has, and they mainly revolve around protecting the rights of other people and respecting the rights of other people, respecting their privacy, their ability to do business in a way that they deem suitable as long as they're not harming other people. And then within that, you also have a set of like obligations in terms of what fees need to be paid for the basic services. So that's one model that hasn't been fully trialed yet, but we think that there's a strong case to be made for it. And the difference between that and Singapore is that in Singapore, you still have a government which is ultimately in charge of setting law, running the legislature, running the executive. So within our system, if there isn't a provision to say, if it doesn't say in the case of X, Y, and Z, you can lock down an entire population, keep them in their homes, then there's no legal basis for a free private city to be able to do that. Whereas in any other kind of society, the government just needs to get Parliament to agree that this is the right course of action, and it can be done.
If one of these projects was successful enough, though, it could be one that eventually was completely autonomous from a state, which would be super cool and interesting to see. I mean, it's almost like, why don't you just find an island and establish your own free country?
The thing with doing that is that all of the land on the world is currently occupied by nation states. So there's no free land left. So wherever you go, you're going to have to work with the government, unless you're part of the seasteading movement. That's the one exception. So the
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So the seasteading movement is designed to try and establish new societies on sea.
Do you remember the Freedom Ship?
The Freedom Ship, I do. Yeah.
Have you seen the Freedom Ship?
No.
I followed this for a while, and the project ended up dying. I was like, is this real? Are they really going to do this? I don't know if it's still live, but it was a project. The idea was build this entire city on a ship. So if you go into the images, and I was like,
yeah, some of the people involved with seasteading were involved in this ship.
I mean, look at that fourth picture, Danny. It's like an airport on top, and can you get to
I
it?
want to read about it.
Right. So the Freedom Ship. I mean, this is I was probably before my kids were born when I first read about this, a long time ago. So Freedom Ship is a floating city project. Yeah, initially proposed in the late 90s. It was named so because of the free international lifestyle facilitated by a mobile ocean colony. The project would not be a conventional ship, but a series of linked barges. So this one was an integrated city, 1,800 meters long, with a housing for 80,000 people, a hospital, school system, hotel, casino, commercial, office, occupancy, duty-free shop. Like, it's people. You've got to go online and search for the Freedom Ship and see this. I mean, it's huge. I mean, it just think of a cruise ship and then like 20 exit. That's what it is, and that's because in international waters.
In international waters, there's no government that has full.
Go back to the pictures though, Danny. I just want to see some of those pictures because they are kind of. I think there's also videos you can actually see for them, but they actually did like the flybys, and I was fascinated by this project just because of the idea of a. I mean, look at that airport. It's literally an airport on top of the ship. You can see this. Yeah, it's unbelievable. But the one thing I thought about with this was, you seen the film Snowpiercer?
I've not.
Is it Snowpiercer with the train?
Don't know.
Like, I wonder how it creates the haves and the have-nots within the city and have the kind of like weird kind of zones of like, you know, the rich and the poor. I think sometimes these things are kind of like designed idealistically.
Well, if you want to see what the current seasteaders are mainly doing, there's a company called Ocean Builders based in Panama.
Let's have a look, Danny.
And they are building individual pods for people to establish at sea. They use
individual pods.
So like family-sized homes, basically on sticks, a bit like.
And can you
oil
connect them
rigs.
so you can become like a community?
That's what they aim to do. Yeah.
Holy shit, this is
two
cool.
of these are going up this summer.
Wow, this is fucking cool.
Panama, yeah.
Oh my god, that's so cool. It's like something from the future.
So these are going from about 400,000 US.
How
each.
far out to sea do you have to be?
They're actually starting doing these within Panamanian territory, but then you have to go out I think it's a couple of dozen nautical miles until you're actually in international waters.
Okay. And then once you're out there and you're in your home, hold on, but you're just kind of stuck in a little pod.
You would be.
What can you do?
You would be, but there are ways that you can. You could go out there. You could fish. You could enjoy your home. That these, I mean, people can't see here, but these are quite spacious pods.
Yeah.
They've got.
Hold on, are we? This is like WF stuff. Are we going to be eating bugs in these as well?
You just eat fish.
You fish. Okay, so why would you do this? Firstly, do you avoid any tax because you're in international waters?
Yeah.
Can anyone stop you? Can anyone anywhere go and build what they want out in the middle of the ocean?
Well, they could do. They could do technically. There's not any law. There's something called the law of the sea, which is an international kind of set of rules that tend to be recognized by states. But if you were to go and conduct some economic activity out in the sea, in international waters, then no individual state would have jurisdiction over you.
I see a lot of flaws in this one. Danny, can you get up the green pod? Oh, it's a land pod. I mean, they're kind of cool, though. Look at that. See, I want to live there. Fuck it. That is so cool. What's the eco pod? Is it the budget one?
This one's the one in production, by the looks of it.
We're not meant to like pods, but these are very cool. I like these.
Yeah, but that's what it actually looks like.
What is that? Our first prototype. That's shit. Why put that there? We launched original.
Well, they're showing you how much it's improved since the original.
Okay, but so there's lots of what we're saying here. There's lots of experimentation of ideas.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, if somebody had enough money, they could go to a poor country and say, "We want to buy some land from you." That would be a possibility. A country could sell its land.
They could, but that land would still be subject to all the normal laws of the country.
Why?
Because it's part of that country's sovereign territory.
What if that country sells its sovereign territory, though? Can it not do that?
Well, when people normally say buy land, they're talking about buying it in the same way that you bought this home, presumably.
No, I'm talking about someone rich enough to go to a country and say, I just want to buy that one island. I just want that. I'll give you 20 billion, whatever the price is, but we're claiming sovereignty over at that point. You can't, like, we're separating ourselves from you. We're going to establish our own country.
Well, typically there's a parliament and legal system, and you can't reverse sovereignty on any particular piece of land you've sold unless you go through the parliament.
But just imagine that scenario.
Okay, let's imagine it.
Yeah. Could you establish your own country?
You could, yes. There wouldn't be any reason for you to not be able to establish a country. Your obstacle would be whether this country is recognized by others.
Yeah.
So there are certain places that are seeking international recognition at the moment. One example is Liberland, which is...
Yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah, an area between Serbia and Croatia where the river has moved, which normally marked the border between which previously marked the border between the countries. And because the river has moved, there is an area in the U-bend of the river, which is kind of ambiguous territory. It's not, people aren't sure whether it belongs to Serbia or Croatia. And so some people have come together and tried to claim this land. Their project is called Liberland, and they're seeking international recognition from other countries. And that has proved to be quite difficult because of the sensitivity around this particular piece of land.
Yeah.
There's a different view as to whether they're allowed to be there and allowed to establish the project, depending on whether you consult the Serbian or the Croatian government. So there's some sensitivities there. But that's one of the key things that you need to have in order normally to trade with other people, to have a passport that's accepted at other countries. If you want to visit other countries, it's international recognition.
Yeah. I mean, look, okay, it's pretty clear that to establish these free, independent private cities, whatever you want to call them, it needs to be within the structure of a open, willing government that's allowing it to happen. What types of governments do you think are most likely? Is it more developing countries because there's an economic incentive?
I would say that where we tend to focus our efforts is in developing countries, partly because they're a bit more open-minded and they're looking for solutions. And if you go to developed countries, it's typically harder because people tend to view politics through a slightly different lens. I would argue in part because maybe like some bad political ideas have started to become more popular in recent decades. And
Such as what's
well, so let's take this country as an example. I would argue that the reason why this country is so
Fucked.
it's become so well, it's still one of the wealthiest countries of the world, is because we had a long period prior to the Second World War and the First World War where we did have a very different system of government, where government, again, the proportion of government activity was like less than 10% of GDP.
what are we at? We're like 40% now.
We're at about 50%.
Are we 50 now? It's ridiculous.
It's kind of gone up in the COVID response, and
I've talked about this on the show
down a
recently.
little.
One of the things that was discussed recently with regards to inflation, the government was looking to remove 90,000 positions from within government. It's like, that's a lot of positions, and that was all new positions that were added within government in the last 4 years.
Since 2016 it was.
Was it 2016? So they wanted to remove 90,000, but they'd added a net 90,000 new people working for the government since 2016.
That must be public servants in general, right? So that includes doctors, nurses, teachers.
I don't know.
It's not
Civil service jobs, it says.
Civil
service.
Yeah.
But imagine how many of those have come just in the last 2 years because of COVID, or 2.5 years, whatever it is.
Yeah. That seems like an incredibly high number to me, because I think the total figure is about 420,000 civil servants in the UK. But
Yeah. Well, 90,000 civil service jobs like to lose in an attempt to Boris Johnson find money to ease the cost of living crisis. I mean, look, it's I saw it here even in the US. There was like a report like 60% of government spending is on government. Or 60% of tax. What was it? We saw it recently.
I can't remember.
But I mean, the point is like these successful Western liberal democracies have the size of the state. It's just got out of hand. It's got too big.
And it takes a lot of time for if you accumulate capital over a long period of time. I don't know, when was this house built, just out of interest?
About a year ago.
About a year ago. Okay, so it's a new build house.
Yeah.
Well, like the area that I grew up in, in Gillingham, the houses there are normally built in the 1890s, most of them.
Right.
So that's kind of capital stock that you developed a long time ago, that you developed during the period of the gold standard, that you developed during a period when government spending was much lower, when there was lots of the things that we take for granted, like government funding of science, the NHS, all these things, like none of them existed.
Houses built with solid walls.
This house is built with solid walls.
I'm talking about the houses in Gillingham. They're built in the 1890s.
Oh yeah, they
all the walls
they
will be
last.
solid.
Exactly, they are. They're good quality builds.
So I don't know if you saw. You might not have seen it. There's a whole estate that's just been built up around here. I got back from holiday 2 weeks ago. I went away for 2 weeks. The houses that are there now, you can see them, did not exist before I went. In 4 weeks, a whole row of houses just appeared.
Okay.
And I don't know if they started the day after and they finished the day before I got there, but like they've just propped up.
Okay. Well, there's nothing necessarily bad about that.
No, there is, because they're soulless, badly designed, badly built, shitty estates. They're terrible. The properties, like one of my friends moved into one of these similar estates by the same company building them. The house, like after they moved in, the amount of problems they had with it just moving, the walls cracking. These are shit houses built very badly.
It's interesting because people often say that, like, if you had someone told me that roughly, like in Western societies, roughly half the housing stock or the building stock was built before the Second World War and roughly half afterwards. And if you ask anyone, would you prefer to keep all of the houses, all of the structures that were built before the Second World War or after, then they always say before, because these houses tend to be, or these buildings in general tend to be more aesthetically pleasing, built to they're longer to last. And this is the opposite of what you would what people that are supporters of the current urban planning system and land planning system would expect, because the whole argument for intervention in the housing market and for being very prescriptive about how houses should be built, what the size of the rooms needs to be in order for it to be a suitable dwelling, and there are lots of those that exist. All of these are designed to improve quality, but the result is that because you end up having to comply with all of these regulations to do with size and the shape of the housing and things like this, you add on extra costs, and then this means that in other areas you have to skimp in order to come down and be competitive with your pricing. So we find that actually the result is the opposite of being very prescriptive in
Do you want me to
housing
tell you a
regulation.
really dumb regulation for this house?
Tell me.
So, did you notice the wheelchair ramp on the way in?
Yeah, I did.
So that's waiting to be removed. So this house could only be signed off once it had a wheelchair ramp established. But the problem with that is a gravel track. It's a gravel path to the wheelchair ramp. Also, there's nobody in this house that needs a wheelchair. But it can't be signed off. But as soon as it's signed off, you can then remove it.
Right. That's bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came across some similar stuff in the US. So I went to visit someone in Austin who was who was about to buy a house and having the house built, and they were just waiting for someone to come in and put in flooring. They were going to put in their own flooring, like entirely from scratch. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Well, because the house has to be sold in a completed form before it can be signed off, before they can get a loan for it, all these things. So they're just having to do all of this extra work, and then the plan is to remove it entirely and then start it again." So there's lots of these regulations that do add all of these costs and push house prices up, and it's quite bizarre. I'd be interested to know why this particular house has to have a wheelchair ramp.
No, they all do. I think they all do now.
Due to size? Or
I think
any
I
new
don't know.
house? Or?
I have no idea. All I know is for this house that it had to have a wheelchair access. I think it's because there's a step in front of the...
Yeah.
Most houses don't have a step. Even if you get up that ramp up that step, you still got to go over the step into the house. But I think it might be because the house has a step in front of the front door, so it has to exist. But that is a broad regulation. Whatever the regulation is, it's not because that exists. But like I say, you can remove it afterwards. There's no law that says I have to keep it.
Yeah.
The whole thing is absolutely ridiculous because that's just one example. There's so many with this house. Like, it's just with new build, and I think that's the problem. When you build big government, you create a lot of jobs for people to have to create rules and enforce those rules. Yeah, if you reduce the size of government, you're gonna have to get rid of a lot of those fucking stupid rules.
Yeah, it's
what you're advocating for.
All of these policies often have the opposite impact, and that's why we're advocating for what we're advocating. And I mentioned Próspera at the beginning. This is an area, for example, where they don't have any of these prescriptions around what you can and can't build. They don't have prescriptions around things having to be in a certain predefined way in order to be sold and put on the market. They're using like modular housing, for example. So this means that you can just build one unit of a house and have parts of the house where extra areas can be added on at a later time if you want them to. And this is... It looks nice and neat, and it's also quite cheap to do and produces a really nice aesthetic. So this is the kind of thing that's possible in free cities, but unfortunately we have a different system which adds to costs and creates problems in most parts of the world.
Do you think you could ever establish a free city here in the UK? Is there even an attempt to do that?
Well, we'd have to...
Can we do it in Bedford?
We'd have to convince people that this was something that would be beneficial. And if you look at where parties are at the moment, where people get the votes, there's not really much in the way of libertarianism in the UK at all. No. There is a very small libertarian party that doesn't get very many votes. But if you look at the policies of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, there's not a huge amount of difference between them, I would argue.
No, I completely agree. I mean, the Conservative Party don't look like the Conservative Party anymore.
No, I mean, it's like they want slightly less spending than Labour, but they want to see more spending every year. And by the way, I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier this week where you made reference to austerity in the UK and said that this was dealt with badly. But one of the things people often don't know about austerity is that even in inflation-adjusted terms, there was no overall reduction in spending, even during this whole period when the whole country was talking about. But like even inflation-adjusted, there was no reduction in spending.
Yeah, I mean, the austerity rules were just a very cruel set of rules that made very little difference in the grand scheme of things. If you want to make a significant difference to spending, you massively reduce the size of government.
Yeah, this is what I would say austerity means, reducing the size of government.
Yeah.
And the only sense in which it reduced is in terms of the percentage of government's spending in terms of overall GDP. But the actual figures, the actual total amount of resource going to the government, continue to go up every year. So this is what I think we need, and I think it's really troubling that there are still so many social problems, and there are new social problems that exist in this country, which I don't think existed 100 years ago. Like there are certainly many ways in which society has improved immensely, but what you should be looking at is the rate of improvement. And if you look back to, say, someone in 1850 versus how well off they were in comparison to someone in 1900, it's like a really, really huge difference. Like the average house price, for example, like people didn't really own homes in 1850, like everyday people. That started to become a thing in about 1880, 1890. The amount of time children were spending in schools was going up. The amount of like good quality medical care was going up. If you look at house prices, for example, in the UK, they went from like 13 times average incomes in 1850 to something like 4 just before the First World War. And so all of these improvements were happening, but since we've dramatically increased the size of government, some of those trends have started to go back in the wrong direction, and we started to have lots of new social problems in this country. And to go back to your question of why there's not whether we should establish a free city or try to establish a free city in the UK, of course that would be a brilliant thing. But I personally feel that because we've had such a long period of development, and because lots of people are still living in houses that were built in the 1890s or whatever it is, you can do quite a lot wrong and you can still have a relatively high standard of living. And I would argue that that's what we've done. You're able to just kind of coast off the capital you've accumulated historically and do reasonably well, just not have the pace of improvement that you used to have.
Well, everything.
And I'd argue that's what's happened.
And unless you're particularly wealthy, everything's just getting shitter a little bit. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Everything's just getting a little bit shitter for most people. Like they're getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And like you say, it's increasing the size of government. It's also the money printing.
Yeah.
The disproportional impact that has on people. We had a guy on our show called Ovik Roy. I recommend you listen to a show. You like him. He works for a free op in the US. It's a think tank. And they talk about the compounding impact of inflation on the poor.
Okay.
And he even said even at low inflation rates, at 2%, has a compounding impact on the poor. You're just creating a widening wealth gap. That's worth listening to. Also, have you been to Harlow recently?
No, I haven't actually.
So I went down to Harlow recently, was making a film about inflation, ended up finding this art block. Can you see if I can't remember, it's an old office block, disused office block. To solve their housing problems, they've converted it into residential housing. I can't remember the name of the building. It begins with a T. If you search up Harlow...
The Lawn?
No. Residential office block. You got to see this. Let me show you this. This to me is a very strong signal of the country going in the wrong... Yeah, Terminus House. There we go. Human warehouse housing. Okay, so it's an old disused office block. They have a housing issue in the country. So they handed this over to a private operator to convert it into social housing. It's a fucking ghetto. You get down there, and it's firstly around it's right near the town centre, but I would say the poor end of the town centre, the more kind of betting shops and charity shops. There's a bingo in it, but around the edge they've got like outside, and it was so depressing to see, but outside slot machine bingo, and then you have to go up through a set of steps to get into the building, and it's horrendous. I'm like, how is our solution for poverty and homelessness and single parent families to put them all inside this kind of ghettoized office block rather than before, where at least we used to be able to provide social housing?
Yeah.
And you know what? Because of the size of government. This is why we Bitcoin. This is because we try and advocate for smaller government, or some people are no government, but smaller government, more responsible economic policy.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the solution is you just need to be able to build more houses. And it really stepped up in about 1948 with the Town and Country Planning Act. But prior to the First World War, there was very little in way of planning restrictions. And you had huge amount of new housing being built. And I think part of the reason why these sort of solutions seem to be necessary is that it's very hard and very expensive to build new places at the moment. And this is one of the things that Free Cities aims to solve, and I'd like to see changed in this country as well.
I can tell you something funny. When me and Danny popped out, we were talking about this one, and I was like, I'm so skeptical. I'm going to really like push some tough questions on him. But I really had that moment where it clicked with me when you were talking about Honduras, in that the investment opportunity for some companies is limited because they fear the issues with the judicial system or security, and that most of us know that the government's pretty fucking useless at most things, apart from tax collection, maybe borders, and a few other things, right? Again, I don't advocate for no government, but the fact that you can A/B test whether you can prove that we can do some things running part of the country better than the government, I think is brilliant. I like that idea, and I'm convinced. Like, I'm on board now. I get it. Yeah, I'm actually interested in learning a lot more about this. I want to go and visit that place in Honduras, and I want to know about this place in Africa when it's announced, and I'd like to go.
I think we've covered some historical examples of places that have done quite well on this sort of model. And what we're basically advocating is that we try and examine what's worked well, because the world is a very complicated place, and there are so many different factors that you have to take into account when you're analyzing what a society has been through and why it's been successful and why it hasn't been. And what we try and do at the foundation is try and distill that down to the basic principles, the market ideas that have made society successful in the past. And we try and make that like a kind of cleaner and simpler legal framework, and we adopt that in the places that we're working with, or encourage that for other people that want to try out something new. So we've covered quite a lot, and I'm pleased to have had the conversation with you today, Peter.
Well, I'd like to do this again, actually, and the reason being, I think I want to do a lot more. I want to read Balaji. I haven't finished Balaji's book yet, and I'd like to read a lot more about what's been going on this. I'd like to do this again.
That'd be great.
But if you've ever got something you want to talk about, you're welcome to come back on the show and just tell us if there's a particular project you want to tell us about. How can people support you or help you? You're obviously a foundation, so what can people do if they're interested in this?
So you can go to www.free-cities.org, and there's a section on our website called Get Involved. One of the things that people might want to do if they're interested in free communities is come to our conference in October. That takes place from October 21st to the 23rd in Prague. And we're going to be showcasing projects like the Honduran projects there, like Liebestad in Norway. We should hopefully have something that we can say about the West African project there as well. So if people want to come along to that would be a great way to support us. There are also ways that you can volunteer or donate and things. So visit our website, free-cities.org, to find out about the options.
Amazing. Well, listen, all the best for this. And I really want to do this again. So thank you for coming in. And hopefully I'll talk to you again.
All right. Thanks very much, Peter.